Hey guys, it's me, Seren, back with another video. So this video is going to be about problems that I had with the Get Down. Now before I even start, I have not watched the Get Down. So this isn't really going to be about problems I have with the plot or anything like that. There's going to be kind of about some issues that I had going into the show and with the promotion, with the concept of the show, and just some thoughts that I had. I haven't watched it. Honestly, I wasn't planning to watch it. I wasn't impressed with the promotion, and I had concerns, which I'm going to talk about in this video. But even aside from that, the Get Down just doesn't look interesting to me. It's just not the kind of show that I personally would watch. Same with Luke Cage. I know a lot of you guys are super duper pressed over Luke Cage. I'm going to watch it, but I'm really not that big of a Marvel fan, and I don't Marvel, I have to watch it. And I'm also really not a binge watcher either. It took me 2 months to watch Stranger Things. It took me 6 months to watch Daredevil, because a lot of you guys have been asking me about the Get Down and Luke Cage, because I know the way that a lot of people watch TV and especially shows that come on Netflix is to binge watch it the instant that it comes out. But I have I don't want to say that it's a bad habit, because it's not bad, but that's not really the way that I consume media. And I'm also not a binge watcher, really. I'll watch one show and one episode and then another episode. I'm not gonna sit down and devote an entire day to watching Luke Cage or The Get Down. So that's just not gonna happen. I am gonna watch probably at least one episode of The Get Down, the pilot, and I'm gonna watch Luke Cage at some point. I'm just not pressed about it. Sorry. And I feel again, for me, Luke Cage doesn't look that interesting to me, just The Get Down didn't look that interesting to me. And part of why we want more diversity, even though diversity has become a buzzword, that means just one black person, but part of why we want variety is so that there's options for all different types of tastes and genres, so that we don't all have to watch Luke Cage just because Luke Cage is a black show, right? The point is to get enough shows out there with black people and with people of color that we have variety, that we can all find something to watch that suits our tastes with black cast members, right? So we don't have to watch. Same reason I don't really want to watch Atlanta. I'm really not a Donald Glover fan. I don't think he's funny. And people are you have to watch it and you have to support it. And it's I get it if you want to support it just because it's black. That's awesome. Yes, support black TV. But I don't think Donald Glover is funny. So I'm 100% positive I'm not going to think Atlanta is funny. So but I have to suffer through watching the show just because because he's black. Because they have a black writing staff, which is awesome. Please watch it. I'm not saying don't watch it, but I just mean for me personally, my taste, it's kind of a weird thing, we want to kind of get to a place where there's enough variety that we don't all have to watch the same shows. You get what I'm saying? Anyways, The Get Down. So, there were 2 reasons from the jump that I did not want to watch The Get Down. The first was Baz Luhrmann as I think he's the showrunner and the writer of the show. I know that every episode had a different director, so he's not the director of the show, but I'm pretty sure he's the showrunner and he wrote the show. I'm not here for that. I'll get to that in a minute. The second reason why I kind of had some feelings about this show was the centering of Afro-Latinx narratives over Black American narratives within the promotional materials. So before I even get into that, I know that's going to rub some of y'all the wrong way, so a couple of things. To start off, I do want to say that Afro-Latinx narratives can be both Black and American. So Afro-Latinxs living in America can identify as Black Americans, yes. But all Black Americans are not Afro-Latinx. I'm not Afro-Latinx. It's saying all fish live in the ocean, but everything in the ocean is a fish. Everything in the ocean is not a fish, So Afro-Latinx can identify as Black Americans, but all Black Americans are not Afro-Latinx. I am not Afro-Latinx. I'm just a regular old nigga with a Negro nose and Jackson 5 nostrils and, baby hairs with baby hairs and cornrows. I am a regular old nigga. They have a different ethnicity than us, which is what makes them Latinx. And I also want to say that I am not trying to say that Afro-Latinx didn't play a huge part in the birth of hip-hop, because they did. But with that being said, why was this specific narrative chosen, to center this Afro-Latinx in this fictional retelling of the birth of hip-hop? I thought it was a really, really interesting choice. Like, I didn't find it, like, rude or offensive or false or anything like that, because, again, like, there are a lot of Afro-Latinxes in this country, in the Bronx, that were heavily involved in the birth of hip-hop, but I just thought it was a very, very, very extremely interesting choice to see that they centered that narrative. So I want to read you guys some tweets that I have open. Give me 1 second. Okay, so when I first said this on Twitter that I thought it was interesting, a lot of people came at me talking about, well, that's because there's no Black Americans that live in the Bronx, which is 100% false. I don't know where you guys got these lies, fairy tales, and fallacies from, to quote Kid Fury, but, like, I lived in New York for a very long time. I never lived in the Bronx. I lived in Harlem, and I lived in Washington Heights. I lived way uptown on 177th Street and Broadway, and I had tons and tons of friends that lived in the Bronx. I used to be on the Grand Concourse all the time. My very first college boyfriend lived in the Bronx, so I used to ride my ass up and down Pelham Parkway all the time. There are a lot of Black Americans in the Bronx. People seem to be under this perception that the Bronx is like all West Indians and non-Black Hispanics and Afro-Latinxes, and like that Black Americans like don't exist there, and that's not true. So tweets: the present day population of the Bronx is 54.6% Hispanic, Latinx of any race, 43.4% African American. The population of the Bronx in the 70s, when The Get Down was filmed, was 27.7% Hispanic, Latinx of any race, 24.3% African American. So how are you going to tell me it doesn't make sense to have a Black American lead on The Get Down because there's not as big of a Black population? I have concerns about the centering of, well, not concerns. I'm interested about the centering of Afro-Latinx over Black Americans in a story about the birth of hip-hop. And the response to my concerns was, well, there's actually not that many Black Americans in the Bronx. It's mostly Hispanic, which is not true. I am a Black American, not Afro-Latinx. Afro-Latinx can be Black and American, but they do not automatically equal African Americans. I'm just a plain old regular Black American, and it's getting kind of hard to see plain old regular Black American main characters centered on screen. And then someone replied and said that, being Black and American, being Black in America has its baggage, but being African American specifically has a much deeper impact on an individual. And then he was kind of talking about like how he's an Afro-Latin, his mom is Afro-Latinx and his dad is a Jamaican immigrant, so he identifies as pretty much Afro-Latinx, which is not the same, like I just said, as African American. He was like, my parents immigrated here, so for example, if they ever gave out reparations, like I wouldn't feel comfortable taking reparations because I'm not African American in the sense that, my people are descended from slaves that helped build this country. And that's a really that's an important distinction to make, because Black Americans, African Americans in this country that are descendants of slavery, like I am, have, we have a very unique place in this country, and we have a very unique place in hip-hop. And again, very interesting to not see that centered. Continue. I'm talking specifically about why The Get Down is not working for me. I am not Afro-Latinx. If you're an Afro-Latinx that also identifies as a Black American, that's fine, but that is not what I am, and I'm allowed to discuss what I see as the dearth of Black Americans being centered in main character roles, especially in a story that is supposed to be about the birth of hip-hop, right? You know who's credited with coining the term hip-hop? Keith Cowboy, who's a Black American, who's a dark-skinned Black American. So why not center him or a character based off of him? And then I said, because the hip-hop story to being pushed to white Netflix viewers isn't palatable with a bunch of dark-skinned African-American niggas running around in the forefront, especially not in the current political and cultural climate. Let's just call a spade here, which is really the heart of what I thought that this was about. I feel like this light-skinned Afro-Latinx narrative was centered to make this story palatable to white viewers, you know, to people that aren't interested in hip-hop, to people that aren't interested in rap, to people that love Black American culture but hate Black American bodies, which is not just white people, that is also non-Black POC, that is also Black people that are not, you know, Black Americans. Oh, there's a bug. Oh, this bug. You know, this is a way to make this story palatable, in my opinion. So I have just a couple more tweets that I want to read you guys. Malcolm Gladwell. So I started writing about I started talking about the tiers of Blackness. Malcolm Gladwell wrote extensively about this in his essay, Black Like Them. If you haven't read it, read it. And of course, I will have a link in the description box to this essay. It's a brilliant essay. I love Malcolm Gladwell. He's an amazing writer. I recommend this essay all the time because it is a brilliant read. He basically unpacks how even within Blackness, you know, this idea of Blackness, there are hierarchies that place Black Americans specifically at the bottom. So if you have to be Black, it's just a little bit better to be an African or a Caribbean immigrant or Afro-Latinx, etc., because African Americans are just the lowest of the low, especially in the eyes of white people. He also included academic studies and anecdotes about how the more Black Americanized the children of immigrants and Afro-Latinx appeared, sounded, the less they benefited from privilege. It's an eye-opening read. And for that reason, to me, it matters that Afro-Latinx stories were centered over African-American ones in the Get Down. It has weight to me. It doesn't feel accidental to me. You know, and I heard people saying like, well, the Get Down is not really about hip hop. It's just about like a group of friends living in the Bronx. No, wrong. The Get Down is basically a fictional retelling of the real birth of hip hop in the 70s. It follows a group of friends that are loosely based off of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, who are real people. This is based off of a real story. This is not a story that Baz Luhrmann just made up and threw it on the screen. You know, a lot of people seem confused about that. Let's have some hip-hop history, okay? Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, there were 6 of them. Out of the 6 people in this group, 4 of them were African-American. 2 of them were Afro-Latinx. So again, you have a story that is based off of real-life people that the majority of them were African-Americans. I think maybe, actually, you know, I take that back. I think maybe 1 of them was West Indian. 3 of them were African-Americans. Wait, I can't add. Hold on, guys. Yeah, 1 of them was West Indian, 3 of them were African-Americans, and 2 of them were Afro-Latinx. Right. So all Black, but again, different types of Black. Like there are hierarchies within Blackness. So there were 6 of them. The majority were African-Americans. And yet we choose to center our fictional retelling around one of the minority members in the group that is not an African-American, but is an Afro-Latinx, you know, which I thought was very, very interesting. Again, like I said, Keith Cowboy was one of the members of the group, an African-American who actually coined the term hip-hop. And the way that hip-hop came into being was DJs like Grandmaster Flash, what they did was they started fucking around with turntabling, which historically is a Jamaican thing, like scratching up records and messing with turntables. That's a Jamaican thing that was brought over to this country by West Indian immigrants. And what they started doing was they started using disco records, which were like African American. That's an African American genre. They started messing with soul records, which were an African American genre, some Latin records like mambo and stuff like that, and they started putting them on the turntables. They started turntabling them, mixing them, which was a Jamaican technique. And what they started to do was they started to extend out the musical break. These are the breaks. They started to extend out the musical break, or the part of the song that was like the sweet spot of the song, the part of the song that everybody used to get down to, which is why it's called the Get Down. They started, with the turntables, they started extending that part of the song out, and then they started rapping over it. African Americans started to rap over it, right? So hip-hop was really a perfect storm of, again, Jamaican influences, of course, Latinx influences, African and you know, Jamaican, it's kind of like Jamaican techniques met African American and Latin musical genres, and then people started rapping and, you know, kind of talking over the beats, which was also like an African American thing, right? Because that kind of came from scatting, which came from jazz, which is also another African American art form. So like that's like your hip hop history of the get down, of breaks, of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, of what DJs were doing, of Jamaican turntabling. You know, all these things kind of went into the pot and came out hip hop. And so a lot of people are saying like, oh, this story is just like a made up story about a group of friends, and like, who cares? Like, no, this is a real story based off of real people, based off of an actual place in time. And it's interesting, and it holds weight, the stories that were chosen to be centered within the Get Down, to me. You know, like, that's how I feel. You have 6 people in a group, only 2 of them are Afro-Latinx, and yet you choose one of those people who are in the minority of the group to center as the main character, you know? Now, someone told me that in the actual context of the show, there's more of a group dynamic, but even still, like, the Afro-Latinx, who again was the minority in the real-life group, because this is based off of a real-life story, was the one chosen to be the main in the ads and in the promotional content. And, like, what is that saying? Like, what is the message here? And again, like, that's not to downplay the very strong presence of Afro-Latinxes in the Bronx or in the creation of hip-hop, but to center your story and your promotional materials around a light-skinned Afro-Latinx and not a dark-skinned, you know, African-American like Keith Cowboy or even a dark-skinned West Indian. It, like, rubs me the wrong way because, again, it just seems like another way to make this story more palatable to a wide array of audiences. To me, same as casting Zoe Saldana as Nina Simone. Like, we can't cast a dark-skinned Black American boy as lead, despite the fact that Keith Cowboy, you know, the member of the Furious Five that coined the term hip-hop, was a dark-skinned African-American boy. Can't do that. We can't cast a dark-skinned Black American girl to play Nina Simone, despite the fact that Nina Simone was a dark-skinned Black American girl. We can't do that. We have to cast Zoe Saldana, another Afro-Latinx, as a prolific African American. It all feels like, how can we make these Black American experiences palatable for consumption by the masses? How? How can we do that? Which brings me back to Baz, because Baz was the perfect showrunner to bring into this project, because that is what Baz does. Which is why I said I have an issue with him, he romanticizes and glamorizes poverty. He makes struggle look pretty. He makes shitty situations into something that people can consume without feeling uncomfortable. That's what he does. And I feel like he was brought on to do the Get Down for a really particular reason, you know, and he wrote it in this way to center this particular story for a real reason. And a lot of people were actually hitting me up that live in the Bronx. They were hitting me up on Twitter, like, we're not even watching, like, they were like, oh, none of us that actually live in the Bronx are even watching that shit, because the producers are a huge part of the push for gentrification in the Bronx. They feel like the Get Down is basically like propaganda. Like, the whole point of the show is to, like, make this story palatable and get white people interested in the Bronx, because they're trying to, like, push this, like, revitalization, you know, gentrification of the Bronx thing. So a lot of people aren't even watching it for that reason. And it's like, Baz, and like, that's the mindset, right? The gentrification mindset, the hipster mindset of romanticizing poverty, of, you know, I'm gonna move to New York and I'm gonna struggle, and that's gonna make me an artist, because struggle is beautiful and real and gritty and authentic and artistic, you know. And that is what Baz does. He directed Moulin Rouge, which was about being forced to be a sex worker and then dying young from tuberculosis after being sold as a sex slave to a rich patron of your brothel while you're in love with a penniless writer. And Baz said, tuberculosis is fun and bohemian and exciting, you know, like, and Moulin Rouge is a beautiful film that, you know, I do enjoy aesthetically, and the music is great and the art direction is great, but, like, the storyline is fucked up. You know, he did Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, which he set in modern times and made it about gang wars in LA, and how gang wars are so romantic and they're so beautiful, and it's just all so tragic. And, you know, like, that's what he does. It's quintessential, you know, hipster logic of struggle is, like, as if struggle is, like, this inherently beautiful thing. Beautiful things can come out of struggle. But struggle is not inherently beautiful, and only people that have never struggled and have never been poor and have never been around violence and have never been in these certain types of situations can look at this stuff and think about how, you know, wonderful and amazing and beautiful it looks. And like, you know, like that is that hipster logic. That is the heart, really, a lot of what lies in gentrification. I'm going to move to this urban neighborhood and it's going to be so real and I'm just going to be living this real life, you know. And then you have white people living in Bushwick and then you have white people living in the Bronx, you know, like that is the mindset behind it. Like, and a lot of the Get Down feels like promotional material for that mindset to me, you know, to make this idea of the Bronx and hip hop and this Black, you know, African American experience palatable for consumption and appropriation and gentrification. And that's why Baz was brought on, and that's why this particular story was chosen to be centered. And that was just the whole vibe that I got from the Get Down from jump. And I just like wasn't feeling it from jump. Like I wasn't feeling it. Like I was never feeling the Get Down. It never looked interesting to me. I just wasn't feeling it, and I'm really still not. Like I said, I'm probably gonna watch like at least the pilot at some point, but that's how I feel about it. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Of course, there will be links in the description box. Please read the Malcolm Gladwell essay. He's written a bunch of other brilliant books, The Tipping Point, Blink, but I'll have a link directly to the essay. Please read it. It's I feel like it should be a must read for everyone. And there'll be some other links in the description box, and of course links to the Twitter threads and all that stuff. So yeah, food for thought as always. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. See you guys next time.